welcome back on Franchi Talks Japanese Art. I'm Franchi, and it's been a while since my last video, but I'm happy to be back. And today's video is about a very interesting topic, and it's a topic that is dear to me because it's kind of the first topic that I studied and that I worked with after I finished my studies at university. So I hope you enjoy too. I can bring you a piece of this new theme, which I think is not really studied when it comes to Japanese art. Because what I'm going to talk about is the work of Edoardo Chiossone, an Italian etcher and drawer who moved to Japan and worked for the Japanese government during the Meiji period, designing the paper valuables there. So the first banknotes, stamps, state bonds, and I think it's a really interesting topic. You will see with me. So I will also talk about the museum that was opened with his collection. It's in Italy, in Genoa, and I will talk about the initiatives that take place there, and this will be at the end of the video, so make sure to stick around. And also, if the video turns out to be a little bit too long, like probably all my other videos, I will make sure to put some timestamps in the description so you can skip around the video easily. And if you are Italian, there is Italian subtitles available for you. So let's jump right in. So the first thing I think I'm going to do today is introduce Edoardo Chiossone. Edoardo Chiossone was born in Italy in a seaside town called Arenzano. Arenzano is, as I said, a seaside town in northern Italy. It is close to Genoa or Genoa. You probably heard of that city. And Edoardo was born in 1833, and he studied etching and drawing in Genoa. And his first job, his career started in fact with drawing, and in 1864 he was in charge of a collection of illustrations for a project called Italia Artistica, and this was a collection of illustrations of the most important works of art that can be found in Italy. Now we need to highlight that in 1864 Italy was a young nation. Italy was only unified in 1861, so 3 years before. So in a way, putting together a collection of the works of art of this nation, it's in a way putting together its symbol and putting together its history. It's a very important thing for a young nation to do, and we will see that this is a recurring theme throughout of Chiossone's career. Now, Chiossone didn't continue down this path in his career. Actually, in 1867, the first Bank of the United Italian Kingdom was founded, and he started working there. He was in charge of learning the techniques on how to create watermarks in paper valuables such as banknotes. So Chiossone was in charge of utilizing techniques to create watermarks in paper valuables such as banknotes. And this was a modern technique which was being experimented with, and Chiossone traveled throughout Europe to learn these techniques. For example, he traveled to Germany and he traveled also to London. And during these trips, it was there that he had his first contact with members of the Japanese government, the Japanese elite and establishment. And because they were also traveling abroad to learn these same techniques. So at the end of the 19th century, members of the Japanese government were also traveling throughout Europe and North America to acquire new techniques. And this comes at an important moment in Japanese history. This moment is called the Meiji Period. Now, I could, film 20 videos to cover this period, and it still wouldn't be enough. It is an incredible period to research. But I will try to boil it down to a few points which I think are important to understand the context in which Edoardo Chiossone was operating and living. So the Meiji period was a moment of Japanese history in which ruling over the country was the Emperor Meiji, and his power was put in place by a restoration, what is called the Meiji Restoration. Because in the previous 200 years or so, the power in the Japanese territory was in the hands of a military general called the shogun. The emperor was still present, his figure existed, but it was devoid of any actual power. So the restoration took place in 1868, and the emperor was put back in his former position, in a position of actual power. But not only this, the Meiji Restoration was started, and this whole new period started with the arrival of American ships in the Bay of Tokyo, which requested that Japan would enter global trade and trade with the US. So Japan had agreed to enter global trade, and especially of course with the US, but also with other European powers. And in order to be perceived as an equal by these powers, Japan had entered a period of modernization in order to transform what we can consider a feudal territory or a feudal state into a modern nation. And among other innovations, there were, for example, a modern army, a modern government, modern education system and schooling, and you can also imagine a modern currency and a modern system of paper valuables. So in these paper valuables we can include stamps, banknotes, bonds, and all sorts of other paper valuables. So Chiossone had met with the Japanese diplomat in London, Ueno Kagenori, and he agreed to move to Japan. There he would work for the government's printing bureau, working on the just mentioned paper valuables. And there he did a huge amount of work. He designed at least 500 individual paper valuables, and he also taught the Japanese employees of the printing bureau on how to utilize, for example, modern machines for printing which were imported from Europe, or how to create watermarks, just like he had learned in Germany and in London. Chiossone had become, by definition, an oyatoi Greco-Kujin. This is a term which was specifically used to indicate these foreigners who were hired by the Japanese government during the Meiji period to teach techniques, modern techniques which came from Europe or North America in all fields like science, chemistry, various types of industry, or as again paper valuables. And there were at least 2,000 such figures which were hired by the Japanese government. When in Japan, Chiossone did not only work on paper valuables. His work and his experiences were extremely varied. He was in contact with members of the Japanese government and the Japanese establishment, let's say. So, for example, he worked during some surveys which the Japanese government was organizing to survey all of the Japanese art historical heritage, for example, in temples' storage rooms, and to get a clear view of the Japanese art heritage. And Chiossone was taking place in these surveys, and he was making illustrations of all the various works of art that he was seeing. Or again, one of his main, I think, works in Japan was the portrait of the Meiji Emperor. Now, the Meiji Emperor did not like to sit for portraits, and Chiossone was asked to paint a portrait of him. and he only had a little bit of time in his company. He could see him from afar and he took some sketches, and then he proceeded to complete the portrait on his own. But the portrait was so lifelike that it was photographed, and then the photograph was printed and it was distributed to national institutions such as schools in Japan, and it was also distributed abroad as the official picture of the emperor. And many people saw that this was just a photo. They didn't realize it was a portrait which was then photographed. So it really gives us an idea of Chiossone's artistic skills. So for this video, I thought that we would look at one of his main works. And what better than the first banknote which was issued by the Bank of Japan and which was designed by Chiossone. The Bank of Japan was established in 1882, and the first note that they issued was a 1 yen note. Now, I say that this is the first note which was issued by the Bank of Japan. This does not mean that this was the first note ever to exist in Japan. Actually, if we go through a quick sum up of the history of currency in Japan, the first banknotes were issued in the early 17th century. But these banknotes were issued by different feudal lords and different Shinto priests, and they are a little bit confusing. They look like this. I will put a picture up, but they were not unified. They didn't follow a unified system. And then after the Meiji Restoration, the government started issuing its own bills. These bills, we can see them, they look more close to our understanding of what a banknote looks like, but again they did not follow one unified system. The government was issuing its own banknotes, but then feudal lords and or Shinto priests were also still issuing their own notes, so it was quite a chaotic situation. And then in 1882, the Bank of Japan was founded and it started issuing its own bills, but at this time it was also the only one who was allowed to issue notes, and the other notes fell out of use, so the system became clear. And the first note that it issued was the 1 yen note, and we can see it. This was designed by Chiossone. We can see that at the center it says its value, 1 yen. And after the net there is a lot of beautiful decoration. It's not overly decorated, it's rather simple, but the decorations that are there are beautiful and they are also very symbolic. So we can see that on the right side there is a figure of a man. He's a chubby man. He is called Daikoku. We can see that he is chubby, he is wearing a little hat, he is holding a sack on his shoulder and a little hammer in his other hand. He is sitting on some sort of sacks and he is surrounded by mice. Now this is a very symbolic figure and it represents Daikoku. As I mentioned, Daikoku is a Japanese deity. He is the god of wealth and prosperity. This figure came from India and was then revisited and worshipped in Japan. It's part of the Shinto pantheon. Shinto is the local Japanese religion and is one of the 7 deities of good fortune. And so let's look at him to understand why he is the god of wealth. So first of all, he's chubby. Now, being a little bit rotund has always in history represented a little bit of wealth, of prosperity. He is holding a sack. This sack is said to be full of riches. And he is also holding this little hammer or this mallet. This mallet is said that when he shakes it, a lot of wealth and good fortune goes in the air. And he is sitting on those sacks. He's standing on the sacks. These sacks are actually bales full of rice, and we can see that they are really full. They are almost about to explode. which means that there was a good harvest that year. It is also a sign of prosperity. And the mice that are all around they are also representing good fortune. I know that mice can a lot of times be looked at negatively, but actually mice come when a household or a field is doing well, when there is a lot of food. So they are there to represent again a positive sign, the wealth. So the cuckoo is on the bill, and this is not by chance. This represents a sign of a good future, of a good nation which is wealthy and it's prospering, which is what Japan was trying to be at the time. And we can also see that it is in a way a sign of continuity with the Japanese past, because Japan was going through all of these changes and transformation and modernization. The bill itself, the note itself, is a symbol of this transformation, but on it we find a link to its past, to its tradition, meaning Japan is still going to keep its own symbols, its traditions, and its beliefs. And we can also see, I think, in this beautiful design, this relation between the past and the future is also, we can also see I don't know, we can see it in its design, because the figure which is represented, it's, as we said, traditional. It's a traditional figure of Japan, but the way in which it is represented, not only the note on which it is represented, but the way, it's also modern. Not only the techniques used to draw it physically, but also the techniques used to render the image. So it's highly realistic. This was not a particular take of Japanese art to be extremely realistic, and we can also see there is some shading, like chiaroscuro, going on. These were mostly techniques which were introduced from Europe at the time. They're not so specific of Japanese art. So you can see that then this note can be looked at in so many ways, and we can find more symbols on it. For example, there is the sun. The sun is a symbol of Japan itself and its connection to another goddess, another god, another deity, the goddess Amaterasu. And we can see a chrysanthemum. This chrysanthemum, this flower, is a symbol of the Japanese imperial household itself. And the the note, of course, has two sides. So let's look at the other side. We can see it's much more simple, much clearer. There isn't as much symbology going on here. We can see again the value, 1 yen, it says in Japanese and in English, in Roman alphabet. And it's a Nippon Ginko. This is just the Bank of Japan. Now there are two little curiosities I wanted to say about this note, just as an add-on. The first is that it says that at the time, the note could be exchanged for 1 yen in silver. Now this is written on the note in English and in Japanese. This is a sign that the Japanese government wanted to put out there. It means that we are wealthy enough that you can exchange this for silver. We have enough silver in our banks to be exchanged with this. So we are wealthy, we are doing fine. And the second thing that is worth mentioning, is more of curiosity, is that the note can still be used. It's never went out of legal value. It cannot be exchanged for silver, but one could use it to pay 1 yen, something of the value of 1 yen with it. Now, nobody in their right mind would do it, because it's worth much more than 1 yen these days. So Chiossone's banknotes, they can actually be researched, they can be viewed from so many points of view. For example, we can research them and appreciate them for their technical value, for being this new technique which was being introduced in Japan at the time and took part in the process of transformation of the country. Or we can look at them from a artistic point of view and appreciate their design and the way in which Chiossone portrayed these Japanese traditional themes in a new way with kind of also a Western artistic style. But we can also research them from a study of the nation point of view, trying to understand what symbols the nation was putting forward when building itself. So I didn't know that such banknotes in general could be this interesting. I'm kind of hooked now, and I think I'm going to have to study them better. So if you'd like to know more, if you also think that this is interesting, let me know and maybe I can do more videos. But going back to Chiossone, let's talk about the rest of his life, because Chiossone never went back to Italy. He lived the rest of his life in Japan, and there he was a profound lover and researcher of Japanese art. He studied Japanese art and he collected Japanese art. Actually, he collected a lot of Japanese art. And when he was alive, his whole house was a museum of Japanese art. The house hosted the collection. But at his death, he wrote in his will that he wanted the collection to go back to Italy, unlike him. And the collection was to be, by his will, on show in Genoa for the people to see. So the story of the collection itself is a whole other story that can take a whole other video, but I will just cut it down and say that a museum was actually opened in Genoa, built specifically for it, and opened to show his collection, to exhibit it. This museum exists, of course, it's still there. It's called Museo d'Arte Orientale Edoardo Chiossone, and it's lovely. I think you should go if you can. Well, maybe right now I don't think it's possible because of the coronavirus, but after this I think you should try to check it out if you are in the area. It is built in a beautiful park. It's on top of a hill and it's really green, really lovely. It's like a little corner of Japan in northern Italy. I love it. And right now the park needs some help because it looks good, but it needs some help, some work to look in top-notch condition. There is a local committee which is working hard for it. It's called Comitato Amici di Villetta di Negro, and you can help them out if you want. You can. There will be a link in my description down below, and if you follow it, you can just give them a vote. It takes one click, and they might get the chance to get funding to do some work in the park. So if you want to help out, everyone can vote. So go for it. So this was my video for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I think it's kind of a underrated topic, that of banknotes. Like, people think that they are only for nerds, especially banknotes and stamps, this kind of thing. Crazy people who collect them. But actually, I just found out also they're really exciting. So let me know if you like videos if you would like to see more videos about this topic, or in general about the Meiji period and about this kind of building of the nation. Actually, these are my favorite topics to research and to study. So you will probably end up seeing more videos about this anyway. And I hope to see you again soon. And of course, as usual, if you like the video, you can like or subscribe if you feel like it, and you can also follow me on Facebook or Instagram if you'd like to keep in touch. So I'll see you next time. Bye!